It's Monday, time for the Live at 5 Drive. Tune in and turn on to the Good Health Lawyer Radio Hour. I'm your host, Patty Finn. The call-in number is 845-429-1700. Join me here live every Monday, WRCR Radio, 1700 AM. Rocking your health and rocking the law. Let's get started with the show.
Hey everybody, good evening. I'm Patty Finn, the Good Health Lawyer, and you're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM, and we are going out in the airwaves, hitting New York City and the Hudson Valley radio listening area. Thank you for tuning in. We come live every Monday at 5 o'clock for your Live at 5 Drive. So thank you for tuning in. Last week, or we were out last week because of the snow, but the week before that, we had one of the biggest shows ever. Prior to getting yanked or censored, we were something up to over 10,000 viewers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, not to mention the listening area that is estimated to be over 1 million people. And you know, that's kind of important. We want to get our word out. The things that we have to say are very, very important. The show is brought to you by Patricia Finn, attorney. I am located in Rockland County, and I handle vaccine injuries and vaccine exemptions. And as you can imagine, it's a pretty busy time. There are a lot of people that are very, very concerned about, you know, what is going on in the world today, in particular education and children attending school who are not vaccinated. That has been one of the driving forces in my practice. And stating all that, I'd like to introduce you to my lovely co-host, Bernadette Pager. Bernadette, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Patty, coming from Washington State all the way to New York State.
Oh, thank you. And you do a radio show too, don't you?
Yeah, every Friday at, well, it's now from 3 to 5 p.m. I have a 2-hour show now, and Inform Live Radio out in Seattle. And it also streams to YouTube and podcast, 1150 AM KKNW.
Yeah. Wow, that's really exciting. Isn't Bill Gates out your way?
Oh, my goodness. Yes. This is...
They might as well just fan.
Yeah, might as well just rename the state, you know, Gatesville or something, because right from the very beginning of all of this, Bill Gates so generously approached the Washington State Department of Health. You know, they already had a lot of active partnerships, these public-private partnerships, and he volunteered his IDMOD, infectious disease modeling organization. And so at no cost to the state, so the Gates Foundation stepped in and began doing all the computer modeling and all the direction of everything we were to do. And of course, the goal was to lock down, mask up until the vaccines came. So yeah, we are in Gatesville here, and it's...
Oh, you know, I've never seen Bill Gates wearing a mask. I often wonder about that. I did look at his pictures, and I couldn't find one. Everybody else, of course, is masked up. Yeah. Anyway, you know, anything that you might hear today on our radio show is definitely not to be construed as legal advice or medical advice. It's opinion, it's information, and I would like to say entertainment, but not really, because the topic that we're talking about is difficult, and you know, people have different views. Yesterday, I was headlined on the front page of our local Gannett newspaper and featured our radio show, and we got a very, very positive response to that, which is very, very exciting. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our special guest, Carl J. Schwartz, Esquire. And many of you know Carl. He is Thorn's dad. And if you've been following my work, you know one of the few cases that has prevailed in the state of New York is that of Thorn Schwartz. And in June of this year, through the grace of God and the wisdom of the court, and let me restate the grace of God, we were fortunate enough to get a restraining order, and Thorn was allowed back into school. His dad, who I will certainly turn this over to in a minute, was instrumental in helping me organize the lawsuit, getting our arguments together. Our arguments in Thorn's case are a little bit different than some of the other litigation that is going on. It was kind of a rough week in vaccine litigation, or month anyway. The Supreme Court denied an injunction in a CHD case. And in December, there was a rather harsh decision out of the Second Department. And, you know, those things happen, and this is not easy, but, you know, I'd like to thank Carl anyway for helping me with Thorn's case and making it the great success that it was. And on top of that, because he is a warrior dad, he is out there fighting for other parents. So I'd like to hear about that, Carl, and what you're doing. And, you know, we can talk a little bit about Thorn's case. The appeal was filed, as you know. But without further ado, allow me to introduce our guest, Carl J. Schwartz, Esquire.
Well, thank you, Patty. As always, you're a hero in our world, that is for sure. And the listeners need to know that the win for Thorn is really the product of the legal work, the legal mind, and the tenacity of Patty Finn. There's just no question about it. We were excited beyond belief when we won the case. And of course, you know, Thorn had been ordered back to school a couple of months prior to that, and then COVID had taken him back out of school. So we had a real, like we couldn't win for winning kind of a moment there when we saw our son getting back to school, starting to do better. We win the case. We're all excited, but he's back out of school again. And that was really tough for the spring and summer, and we've watched him regress some. But we are fighting for him. He is in school right now, thanks to the ruling that we got on the case. And in my interaction with other lawyers in divorce courts and family courts, attorneys around the state don't necessarily know that case was won. And so as I let, you know, attorneys for children know that and the like, they get pretty excited about it because, you know, they thought that statute had just been gut permanently statewide and that the issue was a dead issue. And so I've informed them, no. You know, Patty Finn won that case. It is being appealed by the governor. It's not being appealed by the school, right? Because the school was like, you know, we don't have a horse in this race. We love Thorn. If the governor wants to go do an appeal, that's on him. So that's kind of where things are, and that's pending right now. And we look forward to Patty winning that, frankly.
No, well, thank you. And, you know, your son Thorn is lovely. He's one of 4 children, and he is autistic and disabled, nonverbal. But when I met him in Penn Yan last year, he gave me a big kiss and a hug. And I've noticed that a lot of the kids that I represent, and many of them are nonverbal, they all know who I am. And one case, an important little boy I was representing in Queens, when I met with his father, he told me that his son was following me on Facebook, and we couldn't figure that out. We were like, how is it that he knew? But somehow, again, you know, probably through the grace of God, he was able to find me and following me. So I have to tell you that the children are the reason that I'm doing this, you know, regardless of your views on vaccines and vaccine safety. You know, you just cannot deny that some children should not be vaccinated. And unfortunately, the law that we challenged in Thorn's case had been modified or obliterated by regulations from New York State Department of Health. And what is up for volley right now is who determines medical exemption eligibility. Is it the doctor? Is it the school? Or is it the state of New York? And Carl, as you remember, when I argued that before Judge Doyle, you know, the school said, hey, we didn't do it, it's up to the state. And then the state said, no, it's up to the school. And I raised my hand, you know, and I said, no, it's up to the doctor. And it is up to the doctor. It's absolutely up to the doctor that has the experience, the knowledge, and you know, familiarity with the child's case. And in your situation, your doctor had written a medical exemption, and then the school refused to honor it. And it is important to point out that the school is not appealing that decision. And I think you'll find in many cases, a lot of the schools, I think some of the schools do want these kids out because they are a financial burden, particularly children that require IEPs and expensive educational services. And that gets a little tricky. Do you want to leave the superintendent who's looking at his bottom line in charge of determining a medical exemption? And I think there's an inherent conflict there. And fortunately, although he didn't agree 100% with us, he did grant the relief, Judge Doyle, and you know, now the government's appealing it. Bernadette, let me ask you a question. How does somebody get a medical exemption in your state? Is it like New York and what Thorn went through?
Legally, I mean, if you're going by our law, it should be easier because our law puts that decision in the doctor's hands. The law has some language, something to the effect of, you know, in the doctor's determination that the child is not suitable for vaccination, either at this time or ever, they're able legally to make that determination. However, just like the rest of the country, there's a lot of pressure to only use medical exemptions for things on a very narrow range. But if you can find a practitioner who knows the law and really understands vaccine injury susceptibility, you can still get a medical exemption if you need one and qualify. So, but it's challenging. A lot of parents have to go to 3, 4, 5 doctors before they can find somebody who's brave enough to stand in the truth, right?
And brave enough indeed, because many of these doctors, you know, they're afraid. They don't want to get involved. I get a lot of clients that have been kicked out of pediatricians' practices because they're refusing to vaccinate. And, you know, it's a very, very difficult situation. And, you know, I understand people are afraid. Fortunately, I'm not, because I have my own views on what is really going on here. But, you know, you got to follow the law. You cannot, I know we have disagreements about this, but, you know, you have to abide by what the courts say and then fight like heck to reverse it. Wouldn't you agree, Carl? Isn't that the way to do it? And isn't that what you are doing with these other litigation that you brought that I'd really like to hear about? Bernadette and I would like to hear.
Yeah. So, I mean, as a practical matter, I mean, if you can get to the kind of the heart and soul of a judge, it really helps your case. I mean, obviously you've got to have your expert, you've got to have your Patty Finn that knows this law and can file the right papers and have all of that there. But, you know, when you can bring things to the court's attention, like, you know, the school's attorney lives like 5 states away from your state, you know, that's kind of offensive. And I think it causes a judge to think, man, I think I want to fine for these kids. And so they look at that law and you know, the law is written in such a way that the doctor is supposed to have this just outright power to make that call. I mean, if that medical doctor says this little frail body should not have this vaccine, that's it. It's done. And to watch the bureaucracy of your state take the power and try to just steamroll all of these public officials, put pressure on people in the medical community to just do it the way the state sees it. It's all big pharma, like paid for and controlled. It's disgusting. And that what happened in our case is exactly what Patty was saying. The judge looked at it, looked at the law and said, listen, it is up to the medical doctor to make that decision. And the Attorney General's office had argued that the reason they had modified or attempted to modify the statute was to get ahead of what happened in California after the religious exemption there had been repealed by the legislature. And Judge Doyle opined in our decision that here in New York State, just like there in California, if the laws are going to be refined and defined as to the medical exemption, it's going to be the legislative branch that does that, not the executive branch. And so I think that was just a really big win. And I think it makes it difficult for the government to win out over on this appeal. I really do.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And you know what, I have to tell you, I know when you retained me and I was working on the case, you called me a couple of times and you were like, you know, my wife wants to get our boy back in his school, but it was hard. It was really, really hard. You know, the courts have been crystal clear. There is no fundamental right to an education. Now, I don't really agree with that. And I think that's something that needs to be challenged. I think the issue is that the state has created a class of individuals, namely children, and they are unfairly burdening them with the risk of vaccines. But within that class, there are some children that are being discriminated against, and that is the issue. You cannot go into a courtroom and argue, I have a constitutional right to refuse a vaccine. And I can't even, it's hard for me to even say that, but that is where we're at right now in the United States. Bernadette, were you aware of that by law, you cannot assert a constitutional right to refuse?
Yes, I mean, I've heard all these discussions and it still doesn't make sense to me, but I'm still looking at it from just a citizen's point of view who just finds it very offensive that something like this would not be constitutionally protected, my right to refuse, you know. But there's a couple of things you brought to mind here, like in this open letter to the Oregon Medical Board in regards to what's happening with our dear Dr. Paul Thomas. I pose this statement to them. So I say, if your goal is to vaccinate 100% of Oregon's children according to the full and ever-growing CDC schedule, then your goal is to treat any child incapable of tolerating that schedule as acceptable collateral damage unworthy of protection. And that just seems exactly what's going on is, you know, there is some acknowledgement that not all children are eligible, but there's that they like to deny the number of children that cannot tolerate the full schedule. But, you know, they have no proof that it's 100%. Is it 99% can tolerate the schedule? 95? 80? We don't know because they refuse to do the studies.
We do know that at least, let's say 5% can't. I mean, it's a lot higher than that.
Yeah.
If those children are part of the class being burdened with these
Yeah.
laws and regulations, then they have a valid equal protection claim. And I
Yeah.
think some of these cases that have been filed are missing that point. And that's why when I went after the case this time, I challenged the the regulatory authority because the regulations were conflicting with the statute. And quite frankly, anybody that is interested in attacking this, you know, there's two avenues. There's equal protection, and then there is the other action, which is there really an emergency? And Carl, I do want to hear from you on this, but if you had seen the South Bay decision, the Supreme Court granted an injunction allowing a church in California to reopen. It was very similar to the Roman Catholic Archdiocese win here in New York, and we interviewed those lawyers on our show. But I don't know if you've seen this, but Justice Kagan, who I admire all of them. They're pretty smart, whether I agree with them or not. And I tend to agree less than I do more. But Justice Kagan said that we are in the midst of a raging pandemic. Now, I know a lot of people believe that, but if you peel the lid back a little bit and take a look at it, is this a raging pandemic? You have a 99.7% survival rate. You have prophylactic treatments like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamin C, zinc, D. I mean, there are treatments. It may not, it is far from a raging pandemic. So what we have to do, Carl, is demonstrate that there is no emergency. And before the show, you told me that is one of your strategies. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting what happened here earlier this year. You know, COVID shut everything down, and I just didn't believe for a minute that things were as dangerous as they suggested. You know, I'm way up here in upstate New York. So I just kept right on doing my own work and, you know, some legal work, doing some construction and whatnot. And I just started running math, right? You know, the government's saying we're going to have so many people as a percentage of the populace that are going to get this, they're going to pass from it. And I just started doing general math, and there just weren't the body bags anywhere near the numbers that they had testified to Congress and to state legislators that there were going to be. It just was obvious that this thing, it is not the emergency that it started off to be, and that they purported it to be. Now, it wasn't good, whatever was going on January, February, January, February, March last year, whatever was going on, we just, nobody knew enough about it yet. But by the time we hit late April and we were able to run that math, it just became obvious to me that this was not an emergency. And it was about that time that I started hearing from clients all over the place who were completely incensed by the fact that their businesses had been shut down, their kids were not in school, they were off of the theater stages, they were not doing sports, they were not allowed in gymnasiums. I mean, there was so much damage. Churches had been effectively shut down. And I've been a church member my entire life, and I found that one to be just the most unbelievable violation of our constitutional rights that you could have, as well as the landlords, right? I'm a landlord. I have tenants who haven't paid rent in 8 months, and they look me in the eye and tell me, they don't have to. And the governor says there's nothing you can do about it, right? And then they stop paying their utilities. The utilities are building into the thousands of dollars, and all that's going to get back taxed to the owners on their property tax bills, right? So this thing was just completely out of control. And I just decided I was not going to sit by and do nothing while we're experimenting with the social rewiring of our culture, right? I mean, the biggest takeover of personal and fundamental rights and freedoms that has ever happened here in the United States of America. And so not being the expert constitutional lawyer and having thousands of people wanting to litigate, you know, we started looking around for lawyers here in the region that would bring these cases. And Patty, I bet you have found this. There are just so many lawyers that are afraid to sue a governor, right?
Not me.
Right? Not you. See, you're ferocious. You know, your listeners need to know that. You know, it takes something to just find a lawyer who's willing to just do the work and file the action. And so I was very forthright with clients. I said, listen, there's no guarantee of results when a lawyer's filing these cases. But I said, this is unprecedented. If we do nothing, it's going to remain so quiet out there that the government is going to have just figured that they've won, and they can just steamroll anybody with any regulation or any right. And they can just keep making them up as they go. How about 6 feet? How about 9 feet? How about mask? How about 2 masks? Nobody's even shown that the mask work, but we're all wearing masks, right? And it was out of control. And so I started filing lawsuits all over the place. And the design of it specifically, and it precisely was to just overwhelm the attorney general's offices, just file so many lawsuits so fast that they're in over their heads. Nobody likes getting sued, even though the Governor Cuomo may say, oh, I get sued every day. He's flipping about it. I've had attorney general's lawyers tell me that they are so overwhelmed that they're losing lawyers from some of their offices right now. Okay. And
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go on.
No. And I was also told that the fact of so many lawsuits that they're not used to overwhelming them caused them to not be quite as quick to be able to respond to some of the actions brought by other lawyers who really are the experts in their litigation and who have then been able to get a few more blows in with the litigation, getting it to the place where a judge can actually rule on it, as opposed to having a bully governor withdraw the matter at the last minute, denying that specialist attorney a ruling, right?
Well, that's what the governor did in Roman Catholic dioceses, right? On the day of the hearing, they withdrew the restriction on the area where the church was. And then Governor Cuomo went on to say that, you know, the court's ruling was, quote, a political theater. That's his favorite expression. And, you know, I mean, I am not a supporter in any way of the governor, but does that mean like I dislike him or I, you know, hate him or I'm gonna do that's ridiculous. I respect him, he's the governor, but I'm gonna do whatever I can to beat him back. And that's what we're going to do. And I feel confident in Thorn's case that, you know, we're going to get some ground. And Bernadette, I actually wanted to ask you about the masks. And Carl said, what did you say, Carl? There was no proof that the masks work.
There's no scientific evidence. And we have had a medical team foil that very information from Albany, and the response is straightforward. They do not have scientific data on it. And I just saw a fireman on YouTube do something with masks the other day. I couldn't believe it. It was incredible. He took a gas meter like firemen use and like the local gas utility company uses to sniff out levels of oxygen, right? And I didn't know this. There's like 20.8% of the air is actually oxygen. I thought it was a lot more than that. But what he did is he just put it up to his nose and he breathed really hard, and he could not make the little gizmo go off saying there's a lack of oxygen problem. He then puts on the most common looking mask you could ever wear, puts it down in next to his nose, starts to breathe. It immediately goes off at levels that are above OSHA requirements to shut down public buildings if there's that little oxygen. And he just went through a series of masks, and every one of the masks he put on, including the ones that are normally used in construction, all said that it was a dangerous level of oxygen to be wearing that mask.
That's, wild. But I will tell you this, if the law says you have to wear a mask, you have to wear one. Now in New York, it says you wear one if it's medically acceptable, but you can't get into a store or restaurant, without it. And I've got cases, people calling saying, they have a medical condition, they're asthmatic, or, they're unable to wear a mask, and when they were refused service or something like that. And it's quite sad. I mean, my life has been extremely curtailed. I'm not a big person on wearing masks. I actually try not to at all. If I have to go somewhere, I do, because I do believe, I am a lawyer and you have to comply with it, but I'm not blind to the science, which is, Bernadette, what I want to ask you about. Carl said we have no scientific evidence that they work, but we do have scientific evidence showing that they don't work and they're dangerous. Did you see the video of Dr. Lee out in Oregon? She is a former naval officer, emergency room physician, and she had a remarkable video where she was talking about, she was involved with masks and the military. What are your comments and thoughts about that?
Yeah, there is no scientific evidence that says that healthy, non-symptomatic people in the general public wearing a mask does any good to prevent infection. But there's plenty of evidence to say that wearing them, because the people how do wear them, like Fauci said at the beginning of all this, that they actually become vectors of transmission. And even the Surgeon General said, because of the way people wear them and touch them and fiddle with them, they become vectors of transmission. They're useless. Well, they're worse than useless because they do harm. And there's plenty of studies that prove that it does reduce oxygen levels, increases your re-inhalation of your own carbon dioxide. There's a 2012 study of Muslim women who wear the veil all the time.
Oh, right.
And they compared women who veil all the time when they're out, compared to women who don't. And they found that that 30% reduced respiratory capacity in women who veiled all the time. And a veil is nothing as restrictive as wearing an N95 or a mask right up muzzling your face. So there really is no evidence. They keep trying to come up with computer modeling that says, or they do these really rigged epidemiological studies. You could make an epi study say anything. You can make an epi study says that sex doesn't lead to babies. It just depends on how you design it. It's just really absurd. And common sense tells you. I mean, you look at anybody in a grocery store or anywhere, and they wear them into the bathroom, for goodness sake. And we know that 40% of transmission now may come from fecal contamination. How many people touch the mask between the flushing and the washing, right? And then they go out and they go back to work and they keep touching the mask and they up and down. The whole thing is ridiculous. But one of the things I wanted to say that I found so appalling, I was in tears. There's an image, there's a story going around on Facebook, and it's a picture of like a not even 2-year-old maybe, little child in a car seat when the mother's trying to put the mask on, and the look of fear and pleading in that child's eyes looking at the mother, because he kept screaming and having meltdowns with the mask. The child felt he was suffocating. You can just see it in the look in his eyes, and he's looking at his mother who he loves saying, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you smothering me?" And then we're hearing of people getting thrown off the airplane because their 2-year-old can't keep a mask on. It is a crime against our children. It's one thing to muzzle an adult, right? We should be able to stand on our own truth and defend ourselves. But when you have so put fear into a mother that she's trying to override every instinct in her heart that is telling her not to cover her child's face who was freaking out, that's a crime against humanity. It just breaks my heart, and we have got to stop that. That child is a danger to no one.
I think there are two ways to stop it. One is to prove there's no emergency, and the other is the science on the masks. I think
And-
Dr. Fauci has us up to 2 masks now.
Yeah. Well, you know, and he keeps going back and forth on that, saying there's no science. You can do it if you want, but no, there's no science. He's just being so absurd. To me, it's just so appalling any way you look at it. And I had another thought, but it went right out of my head.
Oh,
so I'll
I'm
come
sorry.
back with it. That's okay.
I hope I didn't interrupt you.
No.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to tell you that last year here in New York, in Rockland, our county executive, who I really like, you know, somebody asked me the other day, you know, would I vote for him or whatever, you know, and I'll remain silent, but I do like him. And I know that he's absolutely committed to what he believes. And unfortunately, he's like many others in government in a position of power. And I don't know if they drank the Kool-Aid or whatever, but when it comes to this topic, you know, they believe it. So anyway, our executive went and issued an executive order restricting non-vaccinated children from public places. Now, again, here's your equal protection argument, right? Why children? Why not everybody? But what was interesting in this case, and then Carl, I'd like you to speak about it, is I did exactly what you were saying. I challenged it. I challenged the executive authority of our county executive to take the actions that he took. And a judge, fortunately, that is the problem, right? You can't get in front of a judge, but we did. And the judge basically said that an epidemic was not defined in the executive law. So he defined it relying on Webster's dictionary. And he stated that the information provided to the court does not appear to constitute an epidemic. And I could tell you right now, if I had the funding and some time, I could absolutely put together a case and I could prove there is no COVID epidemic. I could prove that it's not deadly, the masks don't work. I'll leave the vaccine aside because people seem to want to get it, but if those people are being injured and dying and burdening, and respectfully, I mean this, burdening the entire healthcare system, everything, then I do have a right to be concerned about what they're injecting into their bodies. But Carl, you read that case, Doe v. Day, and you read the judge's decision. What do you think about us getting out there and putting a case together where we challenge the executive authority by arguing, you know, and I mean it respectfully, there is no epidemic. There is no deadly epidemic, that's for sure. 99.7% of people infected or allegedly infected recover. What do you think about that, counselor?
Well, I think we need to get more lawsuits filed in more different places in front of as many judges as we can, making those very types of arguments. And I would say to your listeners, man, we need to help Patty Finn get the funds raised so that she can use that expertise mind she's got to bring that kind of an action. Because I can tell you, even in the actions that I have brought, which do not have all of those fine types of arguments through it, mine is more like modern day legal guerrilla warfare litigation. But it's had its successful moments because I've landed in front of judges that have told the attorney general's lawyers that their client needs to start negotiating with Mr. Schwartz, right? I mean, like this governor, I think he can't imagine that somebody has the power to tell him that he's wrong and that he can't do something and he's not going to be allowed to win. I think his brain just can't even absorb that data. And the judges in 2 different counties that I've been in front of here in my litigation told the governor that type of a thing. And when the AG's office tried to suggest, well, this is ridiculous, Mr. Schwartz it's like he's forum shopping by filing actions all over the state. We're filing a motion to consolidate all of his actions into one county. The judges pushed back on him and said, listen, we want to take a shot at this. These are unprecedented times. We need lawyers to come into court and make arguments and be creative in making arguments. If they ask you, I've never heard this argument before, is that a new one? I'm like, I don't know, Your Honor, but I can guarantee you in unprecedented times, you're going to hear unprecedented arguments being made because they need to be. If we've gone to a place we've never been before, then we need to go places we have never gone before in making those legal arguments. And that has proven to be very successful. The governor's motion to consolidate was heard right before the holidays. I expected the judge would sit on that for the longest time. He did not sit on it for the longest time. He ruled the first business day of January, and in the language of the ruling said, no, this is not forum shopping. In fact, it's the opposite of forum shopping. And our system is designed so that there's like a judicial laboratory in our state, and we should encourage that litigation goes forward in different places in front of different judges brought on by different lawyers all over the place. And so that was a real celebration. It was kind of a little bit of a wake-up call for the governor that no, that's not going to happen. So he's turned around and he filed a motion to dismiss one of my first cases that's up here in the upstate. And we just heard that motion on Friday. And I will tell you, the government's exhibits are like A through Z, and they're like AA through like RR.
And they're right? all my cases, right?
Right. And so, I go in to look at this stuff, and they're trying to create this whole emergency. That's what it is. It's just like information that's out there, the media trying to make it worse than it is. And I knew when it was my turn to argue that if I started down the path of critiquing this one or critiquing that one, that you just lose, because what you do is you allow the judge to just assume, like everybody else does, that there's a real emergency out here. And instead I said, you know what, Judge, I'm going a whole different direction. I want to go back to where this started and what the math was.
Yeah.
Right?
The math is
the math.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's about science and it's about math. And the people who are supposed to be on top of the science and the math leading us in the medical community misled our Congress. They were off by factors of so many thousandfold just by, oops, we applied the wrong rate. So it ended up being 1,000 times less than what we should have been telling you it was. And thank God, when the actual virus went through, it ended up being like 1,000 times less than what they should have said it was going to be, right? So they are off. Their math is so far off. Their science has not been right. And I just said to the judge, listen, you got to look at the plain facts of this case. Who's dying? How many? What are the age brackets? What are their comorbidities? And when you run that math, you realize, listen, the people of this state did everything they were told to flatten that curve. And they flattened that curve out flatter than anything anybody could believe. And the governor should have just been thrilled with it, thanked the people for doing what we did to flatten the curve and say, that's it. I'm going to declare the emergency is over. Our local health officials, our local school superintendents, our local business people, you know what? They've got brains. They're not in business for no reason. They're not educating kids successfully for no reason. They can figure this out. We don't have to have all these crazy state-generated mandates that make it difficult for people to even stay in business. And it should just go away. And so that's what I asked the judge to do last Friday, and hasn't ruled on it yet. But, this is a judge who had really stood down that government lawyer when he was trying to tell him he had to let the case get consolidated over to the other county. And boy, the judge just let the lawyer have it.
Really? That's good.
We have judges that I think they're just waiting for lawyers to file cases. They want a chance to rule.
Well, let me just jump in here. Anybody interested in making a donation can certainly do that. you can contact Patricia Finn, attorney at Make America's Kids Healthy Again. We're on PayPal, and you know, small or large, we're definitely looking for it. But there is a little boy here in Westchester County that has been put out of school, and I am trying to help his parents, but we would like to use his case in addition to Thorn and actually bring that out. But Bernadette, what do you think about what Carl is saying about the numbers?
Oh my goodness, I'm sitting here cheering, going, amen, amen, all the way and taking notes. So he said so much that's true. You know, unprecedented times call for unprecedented arguments. And I've been saying here in Washington State, you know, if you can put on masks on everybody in the state for over a year now, and if you can lock everybody down and doing all this unprecedented, you know, and you can push an EAU vaccine with only 2 months of data, why can't you distribute vitamin D? Why can't you at least distribute information about vitamin D and ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and treatments? You know, that unprecedented time, I just love that argument. We got to get it, like you said, we've got to get these things into the courts. But I also wanted to say, Patty, we have an epidemic. We have an epidemic that began exactly where Carl said. About in April, we had figured it out. In April, we sort of knew enough about COVID-19 disease that we knew protocols. The COVID-19 Critical Care Group, the Frontline Critical Care Alliance, they had come up with at the time hydroxychloroquine, but now we have ivermectin, which is even better, and zinc and IV vitamin C and melatonin and all of these things. And they said vents don't work. We know hyperbaric oxygen works. So by April, we should have had, as a nation, all of these treatments out there, stopping any of the deaths, you know, or most of the deaths. You're not necessarily going to stop somebody who's already, you know, in a hospice from dying, but most of these could have been prevented, and it's absolutely criminal. It wasn't. But the powers that are giving us these ridiculous modeling, it's all the same all over the nation. It's coming from the high up groups like the Gates Foundation, all of the groups that put forward these false modeling, they all sit on the World Economic Forum. They're all part of the global reset. They're giving us misinformation. And so, yeah, let's get some stuff filed. We have an epidemic of a lack of treatments. And what's a shame is it's still going on. People are still dying for lack of information. Families are having to go to court to demand their doctor give their loved one in the hospital ivermectin.
Yeah, we had 2 cases here in New York, upstate New York, and in both of those cases, the judge ordered the hospital to treat the ill with ivermectin. But what about people who can't afford a lawyer or who don't know?
Right.
You know,
you have
a doctor afraid.
Yeah, and they're keeping your loved ones out of the hospital who should be your advocate. Everybody needs a patient advocate 24 hours a day in a hospital to prevent just regular medical injuries that happen, you know. Second leading cause of death in the United States is medical error, and we're being kept from our loved ones in the hospital. So yeah, there's huge epidemic going on here. And Patty, I have an idea. I'm not going to say it on the air this time, but I want to talk to you about an idea that I have for a case, for an argument to maybe put forward that I don't know that has been tried. So,
all right, well, you let me know. I'm always game for something new, but you know, it is a very difficult time for everybody, and I'm no exception. My firm has really been financially strangled with the repeal of the religious exemption in 2019. And I did use some of that money for these pro bono cases, but we can't do that anymore. And, you know, I want to thank everybody for the donations, particularly people that have helped to fund this radio show, and to remind you that, you know, you can always get on PayPal and, you know, sign up for $10 or $20 a month or 100 million, you know, but I have been trying to reach some big funders like Elon Musk, Kanye West, Scott Bezos' wife, who's, giving away money like water. So if anybody out there is able to help us get in touch with them, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm not telling you that, you want a vaccine, I guess, you're free to get it. You want to wear a mask, wear one, but I'm not. And my family is not, and nobody's going to make me either. That I can assure you. And I mean, I'm not big on threats. I told Carl that a long time ago. I never threaten to sue. I sue. And maybe that's why I don't bring that many cases, but the ones that I do bring, I really work hard on. And I know that when you hired me, as I said in the beginning of the show, I don't know, what did I send you, 100 versions of the complaint, and each iteration, I really began to understand it more and more. And it's unfortunate that, I'm convinced that Rockland was targeted with a hoax measles outbreak. That vitamin A is certainly a prophylactic, and I think it's a therapeutic treatment for vitamin A. But like they did in California, targeting Disney World, they targeted New York, and then they repealed the religious exemption and totally hamstrung me. And I was one of the few lawyers out there actually doing this with success. I mean, I get a court order ruling, there is no measles outbreak. You would think that never happened. I mean, I heard the governor last week talking about the worst measles epidemic ever. Well, you know what? I had a judge take a look at the numbers, like Carl said, and he ruled no emergency, no epidemic. And I could easily do the same thing with COVID. I mean, I don't want to be glib. It's not easy. It's complicated, but I do know how to do it. Anyway, we're hitting the top of the show. It always goes so fast. Carl, let me give you a minute there to, give a shout out to Thorn and everybody else.
Yeah, so everybody, we need to get behind Patty Finn. Like I said earlier, I can't believe that I'm saying this I just can't. There aren't enough lawyers. There aren't enough lawyers who are able to do this work and who are willing to do this work. And a lot of this kind of work, a lot of this constitutional type work is not the type of work where you just go collect big retainers. The people who are most often hurting and that need assistance aren't going to have money. And we need to keep Patty Finn working. Her brain needs to be working on lawsuits just like it did for Thorn Schwartz's case, because she's a winner and she can turn things around at a time when there are very few people who are standing up to this government and doing it successfusly. So I wish you well. Absolutely. I wish you well. I'm thrilled to be on your show and look forward to working with you as you battle against the governor's appeal.
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you. And I'm going to give you a big digital hug and a kiss for Thorn. And that was actually very flattering. I'm a little blown away by it, but it is very difficult. And, we are financially stressed. So, if you're out there listening and you can help, it's really by the grace of God each day that I'm managing to achieve a modest success, but I really believe we could do a lot more, and then people would be happy. I mean, that's why I'm the good health lawyer, right? I could be the miserable lawyer. I could be the vaccine lawyer, the bad health. I want to be a happy lawyer, the good health lawyer. And, I serve God, I serve my country, I serve my clients, and of course, my family. And, thank you for those kind words. Bernadette, I'll give you the last minute here.
Okay, and I agree, amen, with everything said. And Informed Choice Washington did raise a little bit of money for you, Patty, so I'll be sending that on.
Oh, thanks.
I'll send you an email. I want to just say one thing, guilt. Guilt is the biggest marketing tool being used right now. Guilt that if you don't vax up or mask up, you're going to spread germs, and it is absolutely not backed by the science of the products. The policies don't match the products. Boom, that's it. We can prove that.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And you know, that's why you're always on the show. I always say how smart she is. Anyway, I'm the scrapper. You're the brains, right?
No.
Anyway, I'm Patty Finn, the good health lawyer. You're listening to WRCR Radio, 1700 AM. Be sure to tune in every Monday for the Live at 5 Drive. You can check me out at patriciafinnattorney.com, Facebook, internet, you know, all the usual social media stuff. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. No show next week for the holiday, but I'll see you then. All right, everybody, peace out. Bye-bye.
See ya.